April 19th, 1945. A forest in Bavaria, Germany. 31 German women were trapped inside a wooden building. Flames surrounded them. Smoke filled their lungs. They were going to die, but that wasn't what terrified them most. Through the smoke and fire, they saw American soldiers running toward them, and for 12 years these women had been told one thing over and over. Americans are monsters. They will torture you. They will hurt you in ways you cannot imagine. Death is better than capture. So when the door crashed open and US soldiers rushed inside, the women screamed. Some tried to run deeper into the flames. Others collapsed in fear. A few reached for poison pills, ready to kill themselves rather than face what they believed was coming. But what happened next shattered everything they had been taught. "Don't leave us here!" they cried in broken English, reaching toward the very men they thought would destroy them. The Americans didn't attack. They didn't hurt anyone. Instead, they did something these women never expected. And what followed wasn't just a rescue. It was a transformation that would haunt both sides for the rest of their lives. A moment when everything these women believed about their enemies and about themselves came crashing down. If stories like this move you, please hit the like button and subscribe to support this channel. These forgotten moments of humanity in the midst of war deserve to be remembered and shared. This is a true story, and it gets even more unbelievable from here. The fire came from the east, where American artillery had been shelling German positions for hours. A stray round had landed in the dry undergrowth 200 meters from the camp. April had been unusually warm. The forest floor was covered with dead leaves and brittle branches. The flames found fuel everywhere. Within minutes, a wall of fire was racing toward the wooden huts. Ingrid smelled it before she saw it. Smoke, thick and sharp, burning her throat. Then she heard the crackling sound, like thousands of small bones breaking at once. She turned and saw orange flames climbing the trees behind the eastern huts. "Fire!" someone screamed. "The camp is burning!" The women now faced an impossible choice. The fire was coming from one direction. The Americans were coming from another. Death by flames or death by enemy hands. In their minds, shaped by years of propaganda, both options led to the same place. Some women ran toward the main medical hut, the largest building in the camp. They thought the thick walls might protect them. Others simply stood and watched the flames come closer. A few reached for the cyanide capsules. Lotta grabbed Ingrid's arm. "What do we do? What do we do?" Ingrid had no answer. She had trained for many things. She had not trained for this. The fire moved faster than anyone expected. The first hut caught within seconds, then the second. Dry wood and straw roofs burned like paper. The heat was terrible. It pressed against their skin like a physical weight. The smoke made breathing almost impossible. 23 women crowded into the main hut. 8 others were scattered around the camp, some already cut off by flames. Ingrid did a quick count. Margaret was missing. So was a young nurse named Elsa. The smoke inside the hut grew thicker. Women coughed and gasped. Some collapsed to the floor, where the air was slightly better. Others pressed cloth against their faces. The walls were beginning to glow with heat from outside. This is how we die, Ingrid thought. Not from Americans, but from fire. And then the door crashed open. 3 figures burst through the smoke. They wore American helmets and carried rifles. Their faces were covered with wet cloth. For one frozen moment, everyone stopped. German women stared at American soldiers. American soldiers stared back. The first GI was a sergeant named William Cooper from Ohio. He was 26 years old. He had fought across France and into Germany. He had seen terrible things, but he had never seen a group of women so clearly expecting to be killed. "Jesus Christ," he muttered through his mask. "They're civilians, women." He lowered his rifle and held up both hands. "Kommen Sie!" he shouted, using the only German words he knew. "Schnell! Fire! Danger! Come now!" The women didn't move. They were paralyzed. Their minds couldn't process what they were seeing. Why weren't the Americans attacking? Why were they waving toward the door? Why did they look concerned? Ingrid stepped forward. Her legs felt weak. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Please," she said in broken English learned from school years ago. "We surrender. Quick death. Please, we ask for honor." Sergeant Cooper's face changed. Understanding flooded his eyes. followed by something that looked like sadness. "No, no, no," he said firmly. "Nobody's killing anybody. The whole damn place is on fire. We need to move. Now!" He reached out and took Ingrid's arm. His touch was firm but gentle. He pulled her toward the door. The other two GIs moved among the women, gesturing frantically, pointing at the flames eating through the walls. One soldier simply picked up Lotta, who had fainted from smoke, and carried her like a child. Records from the 42nd Infantry Division would later note that American soldiers rescued 31 German female auxiliaries from a burning facility on April 19, 1945. The report was dry and official. It said nothing about what happened inside those smoke-filled seconds. It said nothing about the moment when enemy became rescuer. But for the women stumbling out of that burning hut, gasping clean air for the first time in minutes, everything they believed had just begun to collapse. The American trucks bounced along dirt roads for nearly 2 hours. The women sat in the back, pressed together on wooden benches. Some were still coughing from the smoke. Others had burns on their hands and arms. Lotta drifted in and out of consciousness, her head resting on Margaret's shoulder. Margaret had been found outside the camp, hiding behind a water barrel. Elsa, the other missing nurse, had been pulled from a burning storage hut by a young private who singed his eyebrows, saving her. Nobody spoke during the journey. The women watched their American guards with careful eyes. They waited for the cruelty to begin. It had to begin eventually. Everything they had been taught said so. The truck stopped at a large facility outside a town called Heilbronn. It had once been a German military base. Now American flags flew from the watchtowers. Rows of tents stretched across open fields. Barbed wire surrounded everything, but it looked more organizational than threatening. The women were helped down from the trucks. Not pushed, not thrown, helped. A GI offered his hand to each woman as she climbed down. Some refused to take it, still expecting a trick. Others accepted, too exhausted to resist. They were led to a processing area where American officers sat behind folding tables. Each woman gave her name, age, and unit. The process was calm and efficient. No shouting, no threats. One officer even said "Danke" after Ingrid answered his questions. Then came the showers. The women tensed when they were directed toward a concrete building. Showers. They had heard stories about showers. Terrible stories from the Eastern Front about what the Soviets did to German prisoners. Some women began to cry, but inside they found only hot water. Real hot water flowing freely from metal heads. Steam filled the room. Bars of soap sat on small shelves. Clean towels waited in stacks by the door. The women stood frozen, not understanding. "Go ahead," said a female American officer who had escorted them inside. "Take your time. You're safe here." Ingrid was the first to step under the water. It poured over her body, washing away weeks of dirt and smoke and fear. She stood there for 10 minutes, hardly believing it was real. Around her, other women did the same. Some laughed, some wept. Lotta simply stood, with her face turned upward, letting the water run across her closed eyes. After showers, they received clean clothes. Simple grey dresses, undergarments, socks. Not prison uniforms, just normal clothes. They were given combs and small mirrors, basic things that felt like luxuries after months of deprivation. Then came the food. The mess hall served dinner at 6 o'clock. The women sat at long wooden tables and stared at their plates. Bread. Real bread, soft and white. Canned beef with gravy. Vegetables that were not rotten. Coffee with actual sugar. The meal contained more calories than they had eaten in the past 3 days combined. American military records from April 1945 show that POW rations provided approximately 2,800 calories per day. This was more than most German civilians were receiving at the time. The Reich was starving. American prison camps were not. Margaret ate slowly, tears running down her weathered face. "Why?" she whispered to Ingrid. "Why do they feed us like this? We are their enemies." Ingrid had no answer. That night, they slept on real cots with real blankets. The blankets were wool, thick and warm against the April chill. Guards walked perimeters outside, but no one entered their tent. No one bothered them. The only sounds were generators humming and distant American voices speaking in that strange, flat language. Ingrid lay awake for hours, staring at the canvas ceiling. Her mind kept returning to the same question. For 12 years, she had been told that Americans were monsters, uncivilized brutes, enemies of everything German. But monsters did not offer their hands to help you from trucks. Monsters did not give you hot showers and soft bread. Monsters did not treat burns and ask if you needed more blankets. Either the propaganda was wrong, or this was an elaborate trick. By morning, she wasn't sure which possibility frightened her more. And then the small kindnesses began. These would prove even harder to explain. The transformation did not happen all at once. It happened in small moments that accumulated like drops of water wearing away stone. On the third morning, an American medic came to check on the women's burns. His name was Private James Martinez from New Mexico. He was 23 years old with gentle hands and a quiet manner. He cleaned Elsa's burned forearm with careful attention, applied white bandages, and gave her pills for the pain. As he worked, he pulled a photograph from his pocket. It showed a young woman holding a baby. "My wife," he said, pointing. "Maria, and my son Michael. 3 months old, I haven't seen him yet." He looked at Elsa with tired eyes. "You have family?" Elsa nodded slowly. She pulled her own photograph from the small bag she had been allowed to keep. Her mother and father standing in front of their house in Stuttgart. Her younger brother in his school uniform. The photograph was wrinkled and smoke-stained. Martinez studied it respectfully. "Nice family," he said. Then he added quietly, "I hope they're safe." It was such a simple thing, but Elsa thought about it for days. This American soldier hoped her family was safe. The enemy was worried about German civilians. It made no sense according to everything she had been taught. The language barrier began to shrink. Some of the younger guards started teaching the women English words. "Hello, thank you, please, good morning." In return, the women taught them German. The exchanges were awkward and filled with mistakes, but people on both sides tried. Sergeant Cooper, who had pulled them from the burning hut, visited often. He brought small gifts when he could, a chocolate bar, an orange, once a magazine with photographs of American cities, New York's tall buildings, California's beaches, places that seemed to belong to a different planet. "When this is over," he told Ingrid, through a translator, "you can visit America if you want. We don't hate German people. We hate what your government did." The distinction was important. Ingrid had never heard it before. In Nazi Germany, there was no separation between people and government. To oppose the government was to betray the people. But Cooper was suggesting something different. That ordinary Germans were not the same as Nazi leaders. That hatred could be specific rather than total. One evening, a group of American soldiers brought a record player to the compound. They played music, American jazz that sounded wild and free. Some GIs started dancing with each other, clowning around, trying to make the women laugh. At first, the women watched with stiff suspicion. Then Lotta smiled. Then someone else laughed. Within minutes, even Margaret was tapping her foot to the strange rhythm. A corporal named Bobby Washington from Chicago taught them a dance called the jitterbug. His movements were energetic and joyful. Several women tried to copy him, stumbling over the steps, laughing at their own awkwardness. The sound of that laughter, free and unguarded, was something none of them had experienced in years. Statistics from American POW camps in Germany show that by May 1945, over 280,000 German prisoners were being held by US forces. The camps followed Geneva Convention rules strictly. Red Cross inspectors found conditions generally satisfactory. Rations were adequate. Medical care was provided. Violence against prisoners was punished. But numbers cannot capture what these small kindnesses meant to women who expected brutality. Ingrid wrote in a small notebook she had been given. Her entry from April 25th read, "They give us coffee with sugar. They ask about our families. They play music and try to make us smile. Either we have been lied to about everything, or this is a dream. I do not know which frightens me more." The gap between what they had been taught and what they were experiencing grew wider each day. And then came news that would make that gap unbridgeable, news that would force them to confront not just propaganda about the enemy, but propaganda about their own nation. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler killed himself in a bunker beneath Berlin. The news reached the POW camp 2 days later. An American officer gathered the German prisoners in the main yard and made the announcement through a translator. Hitler was dead. The Reich was collapsing. Germany would surrender within days. The women stood in silence. No one cried. No one spoke. They simply absorbed the information like people who had stopped feeling anything. For 12 years, Hitler had been everywhere. His photograph hung in every school, every office, every home. His voice crackled from radios. His name was invoked in oaths and prayers. He was supposed to be Germany's savior, the man who would restore national greatness and lead them to victory. Now he was dead. And Germany was not victorious. It was destroyed. Ingrid felt something crack inside her chest. Not grief exactly, something more complicated. The framework that had organized her entire adult life was simply gone. What did anything mean if the Reich could fall? If the Führer could die like any ordinary man? On May 8th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12 years and 4 months. The women gathered that evening in their tent. No one had ordered them to meet. They simply gravitated together, needing to be near others who understood. For a long time, nobody said anything. Then Margaret spoke. "My husband died at Stalingrad," she said quietly. "My brother died in France. I told myself their deaths meant something, that they were sacrifices for Germany's future." She looked at her rough hands. "What future? There is no future. There is nothing." Lotta was crying silently. "I believed everything they told us, everything. I thought we were fighting for something noble. But the worst was still coming." 1 week after the surrender, American officers assembled all the German POWs, men and women, in the largest tent. They had set up a film projector and a white screen. "We want you to see something," said the camp commander through his translator. "We want you to understand what your government did." The films came from concentration camps: Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Buchenwald. American and British forces had liberated these camps in recent weeks. What they found had shocked even battle-hardened soldiers. The projector clicked to life. For the next 30 minutes, the prisoners watched in silence as images flickered on the screen. Piles of skeletal corpses, living skeletons with hollow eyes, gas chambers disguised as showers, ovens built to burn human bodies, mountains of shoes, glasses, human hair. Statistics appeared on the screen. 6 million Jews murdered. Millions of others, Poles, Roma, disabled people, political prisoners, killed in systematic extermination programs. Some prisoners closed their eyes, others vomited, several fainted, but the American guards made them watch. "You need to see this," the commander said. "You need to know what was done in your name." When the lights came back on, Ingrid sat frozen. Her mind could not process what her eyes had seen. Those images could not be real. They had to be propaganda, Allied lies designed to make Germans feel guilty. But deep in her chest, she knew they were real. She had heard whispers during the war, rumors about camps in the East, about trains full of people who never came back. She had chosen not to ask questions. Everyone had chosen not to ask questions. "We didn't know," someone whispered. "We didn't know about this." "We didn't want to know," Margaret said flatly. "That's not the same thing." The words hung in the air like smoke. That night, Ingrid wrote in her notebook with shaking hands, "They saved us from the fire. They fed us and treated our wounds. And now I understand why, because they are not what we were told, but we were exactly what they thought we were. We served a government that built factories for murder. I wore the uniform. I took the oath. I told myself I was just a nurse, just following orders. But there are some orders that should never be followed, and I did not have the courage to refuse. The burden of this knowledge would prove heavier than any physical hardship. The women had lost a war, but they had also lost the ability to believe in their own innocence. The repatriation began in July 1945. The women were processed, given documents, and loaded onto trucks heading back into Germany. They carried small bags with the few possessions they had been given: clean clothes, a bit of food, some medical supplies. The Americans wished them well. Sergeant Cooper shook Ingrid's hand and said, "Good luck. I hope you find your family." The journey took 3 days through a landscape that looked like the surface of the moon. Cities were gone, not damaged, gone. Just rubble and burned foundations stretching for miles. Frankfurt was a wasteland of broken stone. Nuremberg, where the great Nazi rallies had once filled stadiums with cheering crowds, was mostly ash. Stuttgart, where Elsa's family had lived, was so thoroughly destroyed that she could not even find her street. The scale of destruction was difficult to comprehend. Allied bombing had been relentless. American and British aircraft had dropped over 2,700,000 tons of bombs on Germany during the war. The result was visible everywhere. Broken bridges, collapsed factories, churches reduced to hollow shells. But worse than the physical destruction was the human devastation. Refugees clogged the roads, millions of people displaced from eastern territories fleeing the Soviet advance, women with children tied to their backs, old men pulling carts filled with salvaged belongings. Everyone looked thin, haunted, defeated. Food was almost impossible to find. In the American POW camp, the women had eaten 2,800 calories per day. Now, back in Germany, the average civilian ration was less than 1,000 calories. People were starving. They fought over scraps. They ate things that should not be eaten. Ingrid made her way to her hometown, a small village near Munich. The village had survived mostly intact, but her family's house had been requisitioned by American occupation forces. She found her mother and younger sister living in 2 rooms of a neighbor's cellar. The reunion was strange and cold. Her mother looked at Ingrid's relatively healthy appearance with hard eyes. "You were a prisoner?" she asked. "You don't look like you suffered much." Ingrid tried to explain. The Americans had treated them well. They had been given food, medical care, safety. Her mother's face turned bitter. "While you were eating American bread, we were starving. While you were safe behind barbed wire, we were being bombed every night." The accusation was clear in her voice. Ingrid wanted to explain about the films she had seen, about the concentration camps, about the lies they had all believed. But her mother raised a hand to stop her. "I don't want to hear Allied propaganda," she said firmly. "We lost the war. Now they make up stories to justify what they did to us." This conversation repeated itself across Germany. The women who had been American prisoners carried uncomfortable truths that most Germans did not want to hear. It was easier to believe the Allies were liars than to confront what the Reich had actually done. Margaret returned to her village to find her house occupied by displaced persons from the east. She had nowhere to go. She lived in a barn for 6 months, working for food, trying to survive. When she tried to tell people about the American kindness, about the POW camp conditions, they looked at her with suspicion. "The Americans are our conquerors," an old neighbor told her. "Of course they treat some prisoners well, it's propaganda. They want us to forget what they did to our cities." Lotta found her parents alive but broken. Her father had been a minor Nazi Party official. Now he faced denazification proceedings and possible prosecution. The family name was tainted. Lotta tried to tell her father what she had learned, that the Americans were not monsters, that the Reich had lied about everything. He slapped her across the face. "You dishonor your brother's memory," he shouted. Her brother had died at Normandy. He died fighting those people, and you defend them? The women learned a painful lesson. Truth is not always welcome. Sometimes people prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable reality. Years passed. Germany slowly rebuilt under American aid. The Marshall Plan poured billions of dollars into reconstruction. Former enemies became allies against a new threat from the Soviet Union. The economic miracle transformed Germany from ruins to prosperity. Ingrid became a teacher, she married, had children, built a quiet life. But she never forgot those weeks in American captivity. She never forgot the moment when propaganda met reality and shattered. In her classroom, she taught her students to question, to think, to never accept easy answers. "I was taught to hate people I had never met," she told her students years later. "I was taught that my enemies were monsters. Then those monsters pulled me from a burning building and saved my life. Learn from this. Learn that the worst evil often comes wrapped in patriotism and certainty." Margaret worked as a nurse until she was 70. She never spoke publicly about the war, but she wrote her memories down in a journal that her grandchildren found after her death. One entry stood out. "We were prepared to die as martyrs for the Reich. Instead, we lived and became witnesses to its crimes." Martyrdom would have been easier. Witnesses must carry the weight of truth. That burden never gets lighter. The paradox remained. They had been rescued by the enemy they were taught to fear. They had been treated with dignity by people they were told were savages. They had served a government that committed unspeakable evil while believing they were serving something noble. In the end, the greatest weapon was not bombs or tanks. It was the simple, persistent kindness that made hatred impossible to maintain. You cannot hate someone who saves your life. You cannot fear someone who shares photographs of their family. You cannot see as monsters people who offer you coffee with sugar and teach you to dance. The fire that nearly killed them had burned away more than just wooden huts. It had burned away the lies that made war possible. On April 19, 1945, 31 German women expected to die in flames or at the hands of American soldiers. They had been shaped by years of propaganda into believing that capture meant horror beyond imagination. Instead, they found something more dangerous to a totalitarian worldview: ordinary human decency. The Americans who rescued them were not making a political statement. They were simply doing what they thought was right, pulling people from burning buildings, feeding the hungry, treating the wounded. Small acts that, accumulated over time, proved more powerful than any propaganda. Those women carried that knowledge for the rest of their lives. Some found it liberating, others found it crushing, all found it impossible to ignore. They had come as believers in the Reich. They left as witnesses to its lies. And in that transformation lies a truth that every generation must relearn. The enemy is rarely the monster we imagine, and the greatest threat often comes not from those we are taught to hate, but from those who teach us to hate in the first place. In the end, America's greatest weapon was not its industrial might or military power. It was the simple insistence on treating even enemies as human beings deserving of dignity.
That weapon won more hearts than any bomb ever could.
April 19, 1945. A forest in Bavaria, Germany. 31 German women were trapped inside a wooden building. Flames surrounded them. Smoke filled their lungs. They were going to die, but that wasn't what terrified them most. Through the smoke and fire, they saw American soldiers running toward them, and for 12 years these women had been told one thing over and over: Americans are monsters. They will torture you. They will hurt you in ways you cannot imagine. Death is better than capture. So when the door crashed open and US soldiers rushed inside, the women screamed. Some tried to run deeper into the flames. Others collapsed in fear. A few reached for poison pills, ready to kill themselves rather than face what they believed was coming. But what happened next shattered everything they had been taught. "Don't leave us here!" they cried in broken English, reaching toward the very men they thought would destroy them. The Americans didn't attack. They didn't hurt anyone. Instead, they did something these women never expected. And what followed wasn't just a rescue. It was a transformation that would haunt both sides for the rest of their lives. A moment when everything these women believed about their enemies and about themselves came crashing down. If stories like this move you, please hit the like button and subscribe to support this channel. These forgotten moments of humanity in the midst of war deserve to be remembered and shared. This is a true story, and it gets even more unbelievable from here.